Hello crafty friends, I'm Lean from Studio Kato and I'm so happy you're joining me again today for this video about the Spellbinders Clubs. This is the large die of the month that I'm showing today. I made 3 cards and each of them took me an hour to make. So I have made this video as short as possible, but I'm going to say now that the first card I made, I slowed the editing down a little bit. So the assembly of the jar die is very clear in the beginning and all of the ink blending is explained very nicely. So if you want some basic techniques, you should watch the first half of this video, and if you just want to see the other designs put together, there's also the second half of this video. So you can skip around here, but I'm going to start with the first little jar that I made. Like I said, I'm using the Spellbinders large die of the month, and I cut the large jar die 2 times out of thick white cardstock, and I kept that little insert piece that is cut out here, just the opening of the jar. I kept that because I want my card base to be as sturdy as possible. So I'm just putting a piece of purple tape on the front of one of those die cuts. This is going to be the back of the card base. And I am inserting the little opening of the jar right there on the back of that card. Then I'm going to take this die cut to my paper trimmer. You can use your scoreboard for this. I don't have a scoreboard. I just use this paper trimmer for it. And I'm just going to put a score line to near the top of that jar, just so I have a place to fold my card. This is going to be the hinge that opens that little shaped card. So I'm going to not cut this. I'm going to score this with my bone folder, and once it's nice and scored, I can fold it up and assemble my little shaped card. Now I say little because I love how cute this jar is, but it is not a little jar. It is pretty much A2 size, so it will fit in an A2 size envelope, but it's not a small die by any means. I'm going to put glue on every little bit above the score line, and that is where I'm adhering that second white jar to. I didn't put a score line in that second jar, so the score line is only on the back of the card, and the front of the card is nice and even. It's going to fold open like a hinge, so that so it doesn't open all the way because it's glued together at the top. But yeah, it's a really easy way to make a shaped card out of any basic shaped die. Now I cut that jar one more time out of a really light blue cardstock, and then I'm going to add some ink blending to this because I wanted to show you guys how much of a difference it makes if you just ink blend your die cuts. Now it does take a little while longer. Like I said, each of these cards took me an hour to make, and they're actually quite simple cards, so that shows you how much time I spent on all the simple little pieces. But I cut all of the pieces out of colored cardstock. You have the honey, because it's supposed to be a honey jar, but for my first card I made a jam jar. So I took some pale red cardstock and I'm ink blending a lot of colors on top of this. I'm using very deep reds, and to deepen it up even further, I'm also adding some purple in to add extra shading. So if you want to add some drama to your die cuts, if you want to make them pop a little bit more, cut them out of some paler cardstock than you want the color to be. Just some paler cardstock than what you're aiming for, and then add dark and very contrasting ink blending on top of it to add shading. The jam or honey is cut into 2 pieces. So you have the top of the fluid that's in your jar, and then what you see from the sides. It makes sense when you're putting it together, and I shaded both pieces from the bottom, which I don't think is actually correct when you're shading this and drawing this. But this is what was easiest for me, and also it sets the pieces apart from each other a little bit more, which works well for this design. Now I'm also adding some details to this jar or to this jam because there's not a lot that I'm going to add to this jar. So I want the jam to stand out, and I added some bubbles in there because sometimes the jam doesn't set all the way and you have some bubbles inside. And especially on top of jam, if you've ever made jam, there's like crystallized sugar and some bubbles there as well. So I tried to draw that in with some polychromos pencils, and the secret to bubbles is to make one side of them super dark, and then you make the other side, you highlight it with a white gel pen. For the bubbles on top, I did add some teeny tiny bubbles as well, just with white gel pen underneath them, because that's sort of the crystallized sugar. But yeah, adding tiny details like this with the bubbles, it does take a little bit of extra time. It took me like 10 minutes to color those bubbles alone. But I think it makes your card a little bit more unique than the next person that uses this die. Now I'm taking a small die set from the Crafty Advent Calendar. I don't think this is available anymore actually, but if you have any sort of fruit dies, these are the only fruit dies I had in my stash, and they're strawberries for strawberry jam. It's perfect. I am backing these with some green cardstock just for the seeds there, and I'm doing this before the ink blending because the seeds this way are also going to be shaded, and it works out perfectly. Even though it's red ink that I'm putting on top, it doesn't really matter for those green seeds. All your eye is going to see is that they look darker because they're in the shade. I'm also again pulling in some purple ink to deepen that shading even further. The strawberries are a little bit darker than my jam, and I don't mind. It's fine. And to assemble this, I am actually going to speed this up quite a bit because I have a better tip in my my next card when I'm making the next card. I found an easier way to put all of these little layers together, but for now I am just gluing them on and hoping for the best, and that worked fine too. It's just a little bit easier to line everything up if yeah, well, you'll see it for the next card. It's a little bit hard to explain just now. So once that is all done, I also wanted to add some highlights to the jar itself. So I'm going to take that white gel pen again. This is a Sakura jelly roll, and they've never failed me. I mean, white gel pens in general are always a little bit iffy, but overall I'm very happy with these ones. So I adhered those strawberries and the flowers that are included in that little die set. I've adhered those to the bottom of the jar, and then there's one more die in this large die set that I haven't used yet, and it's one of those cloth coverings for a jam jar or a honey jar. And I didn't have any pattern paper, but usually these come with a little bit of a checker pattern on top. So I am adding some with watercoloring. Does this have to make sense? No. You just want a little bit of a pattern on there. Now the cloth is a little bit warped at the bottom because it's cinched in tight around the jar. So just make sure that your lines don't continue over all of those warped little pieces. Just break them off and change the direction slightly, and it's going to look a little bit better and a little bit more realistic. I'm not saying this looks realistic, but you know, just a little bit more than if you just put straight lines all the way around that cloth. I also added shading to this once the watercoloring was dry with some ink blending because most of the rest of my jar is shaded, so this just helps bring all of that together. There is some dies for the string around the cloth as well. I've cut those out of craft cardstock and backed them with white cardstock. Most of my die cuts here are backed with white cardstock as well, just because I like it. I like the look of it. And I do find them easier to handle once they are a little bit thicker as well. So I added that bow, but I wanted to add a wax seal on top of that as well. I think it's so cute. when a jar or like a wine bottle is sealed with a wax seal. I think it's super special, so I thought this would be fun as well. I'm using the wax seal of the month and the wax seal starter kit from Spellbinders and the pearl white wax beads as well. So for a wax seal, if you're using the Spellbinders wax beads, or most wax beads, they're a universal size, I think. You want 4 wax beads generally for a wax seal. So I am just making that happen. It's really easy to do. You melt the wax, you pour the wax, and then you put the seal on top, let it cool for a little bit, and then you peel it off. And to make the design stand out a little bit more, I'm using the DecoColor gold marker to just go over the raised parts of that wax seal. It says made with love. I thought that was perfect for a jar of jam. And I'm going to adhere that right on top of the bow with some wax seal adhesive from Spellbinders. This is very strong double-sided tape and it's already circular, so it's perfect for most wax seals. Now I'm just finishing this off by adding some embellishments to those tiny flower centers. And that's it. That's my first card. You saw me put that jar together. It's really easy to do. I have another tip to make it even easier. And you see how much that ink blending changes this jar. It is so fun to add some shading with to your die cuts and make them pop a little bit more. Now I'm going to make that same jar, but out of honey. So I have already put the card together. You saw me do that already. And again, this video is already quite long. So just going to show you how I shaded that honey. And then we're going to go right into the assembly of this card. And I'll show you a little trick to add those layers nice and easy. Now for honey, I wanted some really deep shading. I love a dark colored honey amber look. It just works really well for me. And I added some extra dramatic shading, more dramatic than I intended, or than I maybe wanted at the start of this, but then I realized that I was going to cover a lot of this up with large flowers. So if the shading is a little bit more dramatic, it's going to be more noticeable, even if you have a lot of things covering it. So that's why I went a little bit darker than maybe I would have otherwise. I'm going to do the same thing for the first layer. I am going to layer on that blue cardstock on my shaped card. And then I'm going to turn all those other 3 pieces over. And on the back of them, once they're lined up, I'm just putting a piece of purple tape. This makes it so they're all information already, and it makes it a lot easier to line them up perfectly. Because if you adhere one first and it's a little bit off, the third one is going to be so crooked on your jar. So yeah. Now, you might have seen me do this on the first jar as well. I'm cutting off the threads of the jar because the cloth doesn't cover them all. Maybe I'm adhering this wrong, but I couldn't figure it out without cutting those threads off. So I just trimmed those off. It's really easy to do with just some scissors. And then I, again, watercolored that cloth wrapping. And now I'm assembling the bee. This die set comes with a bee that I want to put on every single one of my flower cards now. I think it's so cute. And I definitely need some more bee dies or stamps in my stash because they're perfect for spring and summer. And the pop of yellow is always fun, even on a mostly yellow card already. I'm again adhering that string. I'm doing that first because I just wanted to make sure I didn't put it over the flowers because I want this to look like the jar is standing on a table and there's just flowers around it. So I wanted to make sure that the thread was behind my flowers. Now this large die set of the month of January comes with very large florals, which are absolutely lovely. And there are layering flowers as well, so I'm just putting them together here. They're really easy to put together. Most Spellbinders dies are. And if you have the original packaging, it also really shows you how to put everything together, and there are some ideas on the back as well, which is always fun. Now this flower is probably my favorite, with the little bell flowers hanging on it. I don't know flower names, guys. Never learned them, and I probably never will. But I cut the first layer of those little bells from gold glitter cardstock, and the second layer from white cardstock, put them all together, and that's it. Now I put everything on a A2 size card because I was going to have everything overlapping the edge of the jar or hanging over the edge of the jar, and I wanted this to fit into an A2 size envelope. So by just putting my piece onto an A2 size card temporarily, just laying it on top, I know where to adhere everything so it doesn't so it still fits in my envelope while I'm adhering everything onto this jar. There are a lot of pieces here, but it was so fun to put together. All of the dies here, all of the greenery and the flowers are included in that large die of the month. And as you can see, it folds right open if you make a shaped card like this. Now my third and final card is also coming up, and that uses the Honey Dipper. This die is not included in the large die of the month. It is only available if you get the Deluxe Caboodle from Spellbinders. So it's a little extra item that you get if you get all of the clubs, because the Deluxe Caboodle has every single one of Spellbinders Club subscriptions. Now I'm starting out with that Honey Dipper here, and I have backed this first piece already with some white cardstock. That makes it easier to add ink blending to it once it's sturdy, especially for a long piece like this. So I'm adding some ink blending to this craft cardstock with just nutmeg ink from Concord 9th. Any brown ink in your stash will do. And I have already decided how to put this dipper on my card as I'm adding the ink blending, because the shading should be at the bottom. I mean, for my mind, at least. And then I am laying on top, because this Honey Dipper is made up of 2 dies actually. So it also, there's a extra die that cuts out those little bits that should be raised. So I'm adding those after the ink blending, because these are going to be lighter with the shading, because they sit on top and they cast extra shadows onto the bits below them. So I'm adding 2 layers of craft cardstock on top of my already ink blended Honey Dipper. And once they're adhered and once they're pretty dry and in place, I am going to add more ink blending. This is going to intensify the ink blending that we did on the first layer, so it's only going to make that darker, and it's going to add a little bit of shadow to those top layers as well. And that's just going to give a pretty realistic look of shading here with your ink blending. And I just love adding some ink blending to your die cuts. I don't always take the time, but it's so worth it. I'm even doing this for the little honey drip as well. This is also part of that Honey Dipper die set that is only available in the Deluxe Caboodle. This is just a little drip, and I'm using teeny tiny ink blending brushes, which I hate to use, by the way. They never blend well. But yeah, I'm using these to add a little bit of shading to that honey drip, just as I did for the honey in the jar as well. So I'm using the same colors. If you're interested in seeing all of the ink colors I used, you can check out my blog post. It will be linked in the description below, along with a full supply list. But I don't usually include all of the colors of ink that I used in the YouTube description, because that would be a lot. Now I want this Honey Dipper to sit right in the center of a wreath, and I'm using the Spellbinders Garden Wreath die set to make a wreath. You guessed it. I cut a bunch of pieces here. I had most of them cut already. And one of those pieces is one of those berry branches. Spellbinders does them a lot, and they're great filler for wreaths and any floral arrangement. I really like them. And I first just outlined the wreath with those basic wreath dies here, so just the leaves. I lined those all up on my card, and once I was happy with it, I just picked it up with a piece of, I always forget the name. It's basically cling wrap, but special. I don't know what it's called. I'll leave it in the description. It's really great. And then I put some glue on the back of them and then adhere them all together on the card. It's a lot easier when you're working with fiddly pieces like that. Once that basic wreath is lined out, I am going to fill it up with all the florals from that large die of the month, and also a bunch of leaves and little flowers that I had laying around die cut already from other Spellbinders die sets. Now I'm always keeping in mind where I'm going to be placing that honey dipper and the honey bee as well, because I don't want it to disturb any of the flowers. I don't want it to, it should be the center of attention. So I'm pulling it in regularly to make sure I keep space for it while I am adding all of the tiny bits to this wreath. This took me a long time because this card is probably the simplest to make. I didn't have to die cut much of it because I already had a lot of the pieces laying around, but it still took me an hour to make it, just because I had so many pieces and I was playing around with it for so long. So yeah, I do take a long time to make my cards as well. I see a lot of people in my comments sometimes asking how I make so many cards or how I work so quickly. This is sped up, and I also cut a lot of it out. This took me a long time to make, guys. I'm not magic, sadly. So I fiddle around with all of the pieces until I'm happy. I could have kept adding to this wreath, honestly. This is why I don't make wreath cards often, because it just makes me want to keep going and keep going. If you have tiny flowers, by the way, and you want some tiny leaves behind them, adhere the tiny leaves to the back of the flowers before you adhere anything to your card. It makes your life so much simpler. And then to finish it off, I'm again going to add some embellishments to the center of those small flowers, because that's really easy to do. And it's a really easy way to add some glimmer, some glam to your cards as well. Now, the pièce de résistance of this card is that honey dipper. So I wanted to add a little something special to the honey dripping off of it as well. And I am going to add some Nouveau glaze to it. This is essentially glue, but it stays glossy. It's basically glossy accents, if you know that. This, I think, dries a little quicker and it dries a little flatter. I don't need, usually when I add something glossy to a card, I don't need it to be dimensional. So I think this is a perfect thing to use. I prefer this over glossy accent because the bottle also doesn't get clogged every single time, which is also a good bonus. So these were all 3 cards, a very long video, but I really wanted to show you how I made each of these, even if I didn't share every single step involved, because quite a bit of it was pretty repetitive with the ink blending, but I just couldn't stop making cards with this die set. It was so fun to do. And I did want to show you how much of a difference that ink blending makes. It makes everything pop, it makes everything look a lot more dimensional, and I just love it, because that honey dipper as well, it makes such a difference that the focal point of the card has some shading, especially because that wreath is very busy. But because this is the only piece that has shading, it pops a lot more away from that wreath, in my opinion. I hope you like the cards. I hope you like this video. If you did, make sure to leave a thumbs up on this video. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know which is your favorite card of this batch. And check out my blog post for a list of all the supplies. And most of the main ones are also linked in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!